12 ordinary men, a fisherman, a tax collector, a political zealot, a doubter, a betrayer. When Jesus chose them, none of them had any particular reason to be chosen. No formal religious training, no political connections, no wealth or influence. They were, by any external measure, an unlikely group to be entrusted with a message that would eventually reach every nation on earth. And then Jesus was crucified, and they scattered. Peter denied him 3 times and wept. Thomas refused to believe until he could put his hands in the wounds. All of them, with the exception of John, fled from the scene of the arrest. The movement that had looked so promising 7 days before looked, on the morning of the crucifixion, completely finished. And then, 50 days later, something happened that turned these scattered, frightened men into the most unstoppable force in the ancient world. They went everywhere. Peter to Rome, Thomas, according to tradition, all the way to India, Andrew to Greece, Matthew to Ethiopia, Bartholomew to Armenia, Philip to what is today Turkey, James to Spain, Thaddaeus to Persia,
Simon the Zealot to Britain, or Egypt, or Persia, depending on which tradition you follow. And almost all of them, the tradition says, died violently for the message they carried. Crucified, beheaded, stabbed, skinned alive, stoned, sawn in two, thrown from a temple roof. But here is the question that has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and ordinary believers for centuries. Did it actually happen that way? Which parts of the apostles' stories are confirmed by reliable historical sources? Which parts come from tradition, passed down through centuries but impossible to verify? Which parts are almost certainly legendary elaborations that grew around the core truth of their lives? Tonight we are going to go through each of the 12 apostles, and Matthias and Paul, and answer those questions as honestly as the historical evidence allows. Some of what you think you know will be confirmed. Some of it will surprise you. And all of it will deepen your understanding of what it meant for these 12 men to say yes, and to keep saying yes until the very end. Stay with me. Did the apostles really die how history says they did? Careful, scholarly, building trust. Before we go through each apostle, we need to spend a few minutes on the question of historical methodology, because how we evaluate the evidence matters enormously. When historians assess ancient accounts, they apply a series of tests. How close in time is the source to the events it describes? How many independent sources corroborate the claim? Is the source known to be reliable in other areas? Does the account have the ring of authentic historical detail, specific names, places, circumstances, or does it feel like a general, embellished story? For the apostles, we are dealing with a genuinely challenging historical situation. The New Testament itself gives us direct, eyewitness-era information about what happened to some of the apostles, but it ends with Paul still alive in Rome, and most of the apostles' later careers are simply not recorded in canonical scripture. The earliest non-canonical sources we have for apostolic deaths include the writings of Clement of Rome, writing around 95 AD, Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 107 AD, Polycarp of Smyrna, writing in the early 2nd century, and Eusebius of Caesarea, writing his massive ecclesiastical history in the early 4th century. Eusebius is particularly important. He had access to sources that no longer exist, and he explicitly states when he is drawing on earlier writers and when he is uncertain. But he was writing 3 centuries after the events he describes, which means even his most careful accounts are not eyewitness testimony. Beyond these, we have a genre of texts called the Acts of the Apostles, not the canonical book of Acts, but a series of later texts like the Acts of Peter, the Acts of Thomas, the Acts of Andrew, and others, which describe the later careers and deaths of specific apostles in considerable narrative detail. These texts are generally dated to the 2nd and 3rd centuries, are of uncertain historical reliability, but often preserve traditions that may contain genuine historical cores. With that framework in place, let's go through the apostles. Before we go through each apostle, I want to ask you, which apostle's story are you most curious about? Is there one whose fate you've always wondered about, or one you've heard a story about that you've never been quite sure was true? Tell me in the comments. And then watch to see if what you suspected matches what the historical evidence actually shows.
Let's begin with the most famous apostle, the one who denied Jesus 3 times and was then given the most prominent role in the early church, Simon Peter. What we know from Scripture. The New Testament tells us Peter became the central leader of the Jerusalem church after Pentecost. Acts records his ministry in Judea and Samaria. He traveled to Antioch and had a famous confrontation with Paul recorded in Galatians. His letters, 1st and 2nd Peter, place him in Babylon, which most scholars understand as a code name for Rome.
And in John 21:18-19, Jesus gives Peter a cryptic but unmistakable foreshadowing of his death. When you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. The text adds, this he said to show by what kind of death he would glorify God. Stretching out hands, led where he does not want to go. This is widely understood as a reference to crucifixion. What early sources say. Clement of Rome, writing around 95 AD, within living memory of Peter's death, refers to Peter suffering many trials and bearing witness before going to his appointed place of glory. The language strongly implies martyrdom without specifying the method. Ignatius of Antioch, writing around 107 AD, mentions Peter's witness in Rome. Tertullian, writing in the late 2nd century, is the first to explicitly state that Peter was crucified in Rome. Origen, writing in the early 3rd century, cited by Eusebius, is the earliest source to specifically say Peter was crucified upside down, at his own request, because he did not consider himself worthy to be crucified in the same manner as his Lord.
Archaeological evidence. This is where the story gets remarkably concrete. Excavations beneath St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican, conducted between 1939 and 1949, uncovered a 1st century cemetery and a specific burial site that ancient Christians had marked with a memorial structure, called the Trophy of Gaius, dating to around 160 AD. Bones found at this site, analyzed in the 1960s, were identified as belonging to a robust male, between 60 and 70 years of age, consistent with someone of Peter's described age at the time of his death. Pope Paul VI announced in 1968 that the bones had been identified in a manner which we consider convincing as those of Peter. No secular historian would describe this as definitive proof, but the combination of literary evidence for Peter's presence and martyrdom in Rome, the very early memorial marking at the site, and the physical remains is collectively more substantial than most people realize. Verdict: Peter's martyrdom in Rome, highly probable, supported by early and independent sources. The upside-down detail, possible, attested from the early 3rd century, unconfirmed by earlier sources. The bones under the Vatican, consistent with tradition but not definitively identified. James the son of Zebedee, James the Greater, as he is called to distinguish him from another apostle named James, has the distinction of being the apostle whose death is directly recorded in the New Testament itself. Acts chapter 12 verses 1-2. About that time Herod the king laid violent hands on some who belonged to the church. He killed James the brother of John with the sword. That's it, one of the most consequential deaths in the early church, recorded in 2 sentences. Historical assessment. This is the most historically confirmed apostolic death in our entire list. We have a canonical, 1st century source, written within decades of the event, providing a specific method, death by sword, which likely means beheading, and a specific perpetrator, Herod Agrippa I, who ruled Judea from 41 to 44 AD. The execution of James can therefore be dated with reasonable confidence to somewhere between 41 and 44 AD. This is not tradition. This is history. The Spanish tradition, one tradition, enormously important in Spanish Christianity, claims that James traveled to Spain to preach before his death, and that his body was miraculously transported to Spain after his execution in Jerusalem. The Cathedral of Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain is built over the site traditionally claimed as his tomb, and the pilgrimage route to Santiago de Compostela has been one of the most important Christian pilgrimage routes in the world for over 1,000 years. Verdict: the death of James in Jerusalem by beheading under Herod Agrippa, historically confirmed by the New Testament. The Spain tradition, no evidence before the 7th century, considered historically unlikely by most scholars, but of enormous ongoing religious significance. John the son of Zebedee, James's brother,
presents the most striking contrast of any apostle in this list. All the others, tradition tells us, died as martyrs. John, tradition tells us, died of old age. What Scripture says? John appears throughout the Gospels, Acts, and the Epistles. The Gospel of John and the 3 letters of John are associated with him. Revelation is attributed to John on the island of Patmos, which Eusebius and most early tradition identifies as John the Apostle. Jesus' statement to Peter in John 21, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" apparently led to a rumor circulating among early Christians that John would not die. John 21:23 specifically addresses and corrects this. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he was not to die, but rather, "If it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you?" The fact that this correction was considered necessary suggests the rumor was widespread and persistent. What early sources say? Irenaeus, writing in the late 2nd century, states that John lived in Ephesus until the time of Trajan, which would place his death somewhere after 98 AD, making him the longest-lived apostle by a significant margin. Clement of Alexandria records a remarkable story about John's later ministry in Ephesus, that he took a particular interest in a young man, entrusted him to a bishop, and then was heartbroken to find, years later, that this young man had become the leader of a band of bandits. John reportedly rode out to find him, confronted him, and eventually restored him to faith. The attempted martyrdom. One tradition, preserved by Tertullian, claims that John was brought to Rome and thrown into boiling oil, but miraculously emerged unharmed. This account is not corroborated by any early source and is generally considered legendary. Verdict: John's long life and natural death in Ephesus, well attested by early and independent sources, widely accepted by historians. The boiling oil story, almost certainly legendary. The authorship of the Gospel and letters, strongly traditional but debated in scholarship. If you are finding this honest examination of the apostles' stories as fascinating as I am, please hit the like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love exactly this kind of deep historical and biblical exploration. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Hit subscribe and the bell. Every week we go this deep. Don't miss what's coming next. Of all the apostolic traditions, Thomas's is perhaps the most geographically surprising, and the one that has received the most remarkable archaeological and historical support in recent decades. Thomas, whose name in Aramaic means twin, which is why the Gospel of John calls him Didymus, the Greek word for twin, is best known in the New Testament for his refusal to believe the resurrection without physical proof, and his subsequent encounter with the risen Jesus. What he is less known for in Western Christianity is his extraordinary missionary journey, according to tradition, all the way to India. The tradition, the Acts of Thomas, a 3rd century text, describes Thomas traveling to the court of an Indian king named Gondophares, serving as an architect, and eventually founding churches across India before being martyred by spearing near a hill outside the city of Mylapore, near modern-day Chennai, in what is today the Indian state of Tamil Nadu. This sounds like obvious legend. An apostle of Jesus in India, a king named Gondophares. Here is what makes this case extraordinary: the archaeological confirmation. In the 19th century, archaeologists excavating in the Punjab region, in what is today Pakistan and northwestern India, discovered coins bearing the name of a real, historical king, Gondophares. He was a 1st century Indo-Parthian king who ruled precisely during the period when Thomas would have been active, roughly 19 to 46 AD. A king named Gondophares was not legend. He was historical fact. This does not prove Thomas visited his court, but it proves that the Acts of Thomas, despite being a 3rd century text, preserved a genuine historical detail about a real king, a detail that would have been impossible to fabricate in the 3rd century, since Gondophares had been completely forgotten by that time and his coins were not rediscovered until the 19th century. The Thomas Christians. Beyond the textual evidence, there is a living community that represents perhaps the strongest argument for Thomas's presence in India. The St. Thomas Christians of Kerala, also called the Nasrani or Malabar Christian. This community, numbering in the millions today, traces its origins directly to the missionary activity of Thomas the Apostle. maintaining traditions and practices that predate any Western Christian missionary contact with India by well over 1,000 years. Their liturgy was in Syriac, the Eastern Aramaic dialect closely related to the language Jesus spoke, not in Greek or Latin, which is what you would expect if their Christianity had come from Western missionary activity. The tomb, the Basilica of St. Thomas in Chennai, India, is built over a site that local tradition has identified as Thomas's tomb for at least 15 centuries. Archaeological excavations of the site have found human remains and evidence of early Christian worship. In 1523, Portuguese explorers reported finding a tomb at the site with an inscription in Pahlavi, an ancient Persian language, consistent with an early Christian burial. Verdict: Thomas's martyrdom in India cannot be definitively proven, but the evidence is more substantial than most people expect. The Gondophares detail, the Thomas Christians of Kerala, and the ancient tomb site collectively represent a tradition that deserves serious historical consideration rather than simple dismissal. I want to pause here and ask, did you know that there is a living Christian community in India that has maintained an unbroken tradition of Thomas founding their church? Over 2,000 years? Tell me in the comments. Does this change how you think about the Thomas story? I find this one of the most genuinely surprising details in all of apostolic history. Let's now move through several more apostles, giving each the honest historical treatment their stories deserve. Andrew, the X-shaped cross. Andrew, Peter's brother and one of the first disciples called, is associated in tradition with missionary work in Greece, Asia Minor, and what is today Ukraine and Russia, which is why he is the patron saint of both Scotland and Russia simultaneously, representing two very different traditions about his ministry. The most widely known detail of Andrew's death is the claim that he was crucified on an X-shaped cross, known as a crux de cassata, or St. Andrew's cross, at the city of Patras in Greece, and that he preached from the cross for 2 days before dying. The earliest detailed account of Andrew's death comes from the Acts of Andrew, a 2nd or 3rd century text, which describes him being bound, not nailed, to an X-shaped cross, though some early versions of the story do not specify the shape of the cross at all. The X-shaped cross tradition appears to have become dominant in the medieval period. Whether Andrew specifically requested or was placed on an X-shaped cross, or whether this detail was added later, cannot be established with certainty from early sources. What is more broadly attested is that Andrew was martyred in Greece, probably in Patras, sometime in the 1st century. Eusebius mentions Andrew's missionary work in Scythia. The presence of very ancient Christian communities in both Greece and the regions north of the Black Sea is consistent with the tradition of Andrew's ministry in those areas. Verdict: Andrew's martyrdom in Greece, reasonably well attested. The X-shaped cross specifically, a later tradition, possibly accurate, not confirmed by the earliest sources. Philip, crucified or beheaded. Philip of Bethsaida appears several times in the Gospel of John. He is the one who brings Nathanael to Jesus, who asks Jesus to show us the Father, and who helps organize the feeding of the 5,000. His later career and death are described in the Acts of Philip, a 4th century text, which places him in Hierapolis in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. Here, according to the text, Philip was crucified upside down after a confrontation with Roman authorities. Eusebius, drawing on an earlier source, confirms that Philip lived and died in Hierapolis, noting that his daughters also lived there and were known to the early church community. Archaeological excavations at Hierapolis have uncovered a martyrion, a memorial shrine specifically built over the site of a martyr's death, dating to the early 5th century and traditionally identified as Philip's. The structure is large and elaborate, suggesting significant early veneration of the site. A more recent excavation in 2011 uncovered what some researchers believe may be Philip's tomb, a separate structure near the martyrion. This find has been disputed but represents the kind of physical evidence that is rare in apostolic history. Verdict: Philip's ministry and death in Hierapolis, well supported by Eusebius and physical archaeology. The specific method of death, less certain, from a later text. Bartholomew, the most gruesome tradition. Bartholomew, who many scholars identify with Nathanael from the Gospel of John, is associated with missionary work in Armenia, India, and Ethiopia in various traditions. The most striking element of Bartholomew's tradition is the claim that he was flayed alive, skinned, before being beheaded or crucified. This is one of the most viscerally horrifying deaths attributed to any apostle, and it has influenced art history significantly, most famously in Michelangelo's Last Judgment in the Sistine Chapel, where Bartholomew holds his own skin. The flaying tradition appears in several early sources for Armenia, where the Armenian Apostolic Church claims Bartholomew as its founder along with Thaddaeus. The Armenian tradition of Bartholomew's martyrdom is ancient and consistent, and the existence of a very early Christian community in Armenia, one of the first nations to adopt Christianity as a state religion in 301 AD, is consistent with the tradition of apostolic founding. Verdict: Bartholomew's martyrdom in Armenia, reasonably supported by ancient and consistent tradition. The specific method of flaying cannot be confirmed from early sources, but is a very ancient tradition in the Armenian Church. Matthew, the least certain death. Matthew the tax collector, the author of the first gospel, is one of the apostles whose later career and death are least well documented in reliable sources. Various traditions send him to Ethiopia, Persia, and Parthia. The method of death attributed to him varies across traditions. Some say he died peacefully, others say he was martyred by sword. Clement of Alexandria suggests Matthew died a natural death. Later sources, less reliable, describe martyrdom in various forms. Verdict: Matthew's later ministry and death, among the least historically documented of the 12. The tradition of martyrdom cannot be confirmed or ruled out from early sources. Simon the Zealot, the mystery apostle. Simon the Zealot is one of the most mysterious figures in the Apostolic College. Beyond his name, which suggests pre-conversion association with the Zealot movement, a Jewish nationalist faction, he appears in the Gospel lists and nowhere else in the New Testament narrative. Traditions about him are wildly contradictory. Some send him to Persia with Thaddaeus, where both were martyred. Some sent him to Egypt and then Britain, a tradition with essentially no early support. Some traditions say he died peacefully in old age in Edessa. Verdict: Simon's later career, almost entirely unknown. Any specific tradition about his death should be held with significant historical caution. Thaddaeus, Jude, Persia and the Armenian connection. Thaddaeus, also called Judas son of James or Lebbaeus, and sometimes identified with the author of the letter of Jude, is linked in tradition with missionary work in Mesopotamia, Persia, and Armenia, often paired with Simon the Zealot. Eusebius preserves a tradition about Thaddaeus being sent to Edessa, a city in what is today southern Turkey, to heal King Abgar, who had reportedly written to Jesus during his ministry. This tradition is ancient and well preserved, though its historical reliability is debated. The martyrdom of Thaddaeus and Simon together in Persia is a consistent tradition in the early church. Verdict: Thaddaeus's ministry in Edessa, a very ancient tradition, though not definitively verified. Martyrdom in Persia, consistent tradition, cannot be confirmed from independent sources. Matthias, the replacement. Matthias was chosen by Lot in Acts 1 to replace Judas Iscariot and complete the number of 12. Beyond this single New Testament appearance, we know almost nothing from canonical sources. Traditions send him variously to Ethiopia, Colchis, modern Georgia, and Judea. The method of his death varies across traditions. Verdict: Matthias's later career, historically almost completely unknown. Traditions are late and inconsistent. No discussion of the apostles is complete without addressing the most infamous one, and one of the most interesting historical puzzles in the New Testament. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. And then he died. But the New Testament gives us two accounts of his death that appear, on the surface, to contradict each other. Matthew 27 verse 5 says Judas went and hanged himself. Acts 1 verse 18 says he fell headlong, his body burst open, and all his intestines spilled out. For centuries, skeptics have pointed to this as a clear biblical contradiction. But careful reading suggests a possible harmonization. Judas hanged himself, and at some point, perhaps after the rope broke or was cut, or after the body decomposed, the body fell and burst open. The Acts account adds that the field purchased with his blood money became known as Akeldama, the Field of Blood, which is a site that can be visited in Jerusalem today. Verdict: Judas's suicide, attested by two independent New Testament sources. The apparent contradiction in method, likely reconcilable, though not definitively resolved. Building toward the climax of the apostolic stories, Paul was not one of the original 12. He never met Jesus during his earthly ministry, and yet his contribution to the early church, 13 canonical letters, 3 missionary journeys covering thousands of miles, and the planting of churches across the Roman world, arguably exceeds that of any of the original 12 in documented historical impact. What we know. Paul's own letters give us more first-person historical detail than any other apostolic source. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verses 24 to 27, he provides a list of sufferings that reads like a military service record. 5 times he received the Jewish 39 lashes. 3 times he was beaten with rods. Once he was stoned. 3 times he was shipwrecked, constantly in danger from rivers, bandits, his own people, Gentiles, false believers. This is not legend. This is first-person testimony from someone who experienced these things. Acts ends with Paul under house arrest in Rome, awaiting trial before Caesar. A legal proceeding he had himself requested. What happened after is not recorded in the canonical text. What early sources say, Clement of Rome, writing around 95 AD, refers to Paul reaching the limits of the West, almost certainly Spain, before his martyrdom, suggesting Paul was released from his first Roman imprisonment, completed the Spanish journey he had planned in Romans 15, and was later arrested again. The tradition of Paul's beheading in Rome is ancient, consistent, and widely attested. As a Roman citizen, he would have been entitled to beheading rather than crucifixion, beheading being considered the more dignified death. The site traditionally associated with Paul's martyrdom, the Tre Fontane Abbey outside Rome, and his tomb under the Basilica of San Paolo fuori la Mura in Rome, are ancient and consistent traditions. In 2009, Pope Benedict XVI announced that examination of the sarcophagus beneath the altar of San Paolo fuori la Mura had found bone fragments dating to the 1st or 2nd century, consistent with the tradition of Paul's burial at the site. Verdict: Paul's martyrdom by beheading in Rome, very well attested by early, independent sources. His burial at the site of the basilica bearing his name, consistent with ancient tradition and supported by physical examination. Theological, grounded, deeply pastoral. Now that we have walked through each apostle, I want to address what is perhaps the most important question underneath all of this historical investigation. Why does it matter? The argument from martyrdom, one of the most powerful arguments for the historical reliability of the resurrection, is the willingness of the apostles to die for their testimony. The standard version of this argument goes, people don't die for something they know to be a lie. The apostles claim to have seen the risen Jesus. They died rather than recant that claim. Therefore, they genuinely believed it, and if they genuinely believed it, the resurrection is most plausibly explained by it actually having happened. This is a real and significant argument. It is not a proof. People do sometimes die for things that turn out to be mistaken. But dying for a claim you know to be false is a different matter. And the apostles were in a position to know whether the resurrection had happened. They were either eyewitnesses or intimately connected to eyewitnesses. The argument requires that the apostles actually did die rather than recant. Our historical investigation tonight has shown that for the core group, Peter, James, Paul, and likely several others, the evidence from martyrdom is reasonably strong. The specific methods and locations are sometimes uncertain, but the basic fact of willingness to suffer and die for their testimony is well attested across multiple independent sources. What the deaths don't prove. What the deaths prove is sincerity, not accuracy. A martyr's death proves that the person who died genuinely believed what they were dying for. It does not, by itself, prove that what they believed was true. The resurrection is not proved by the martyrs' deaths. It is supported by them, as part of a larger cumulative case that includes the empty tomb, the post-resurrection appearances, the transformation of the disciples, the conversion of Paul and James, and the explosive growth of a movement centered on a resurrection claim in the very city where the crucifixion had occurred. The deaths are one piece of a larger picture, but they are an important piece.
and understanding them accurately, separating confirmed history from later legend, makes that piece more solid, not less. I want to ask you one final question before we close. After going through all 12 apostles, and Paul, which story surprised you most? Which one had more historical support than you expected? And which tradition do you think is most likely legendary? Tell me in the comments. This is one of the richest discussions we can have about the foundations of the Christian faith, and I want to hear where you land. 12 ordinary men. And then the resurrection.
And then, scattered across the known world, into languages they didn't speak, into cultures they didn't know, facing opposition they couldn't have prepared for, they carried a single message to the ends of the earth. He is risen. Most of them died for that message. Some of the details of how they died are confirmed by history. James beheaded in Jerusalem, Peter crucified in Rome, Paul beheaded under Nero. Others are ancient tradition whose historical core is plausible but whose specific details cannot be verified. Others remain genuinely uncertain, the later centuries having added layers of legend over a historical core we can no longer fully see. But here is what the historical investigation leaves us with. These were real men who went to real places, faced real opposition, and, by every account we have, refused to abandon the testimony they carried even when abandoning it would have saved their lives. You can debate the specific details of how each one died. You cannot easily explain away the phenomenon of 12 ordinary men, scattered across 3 continents, maintaining a consistent testimony under torture, exile, and execution for the remainder of their lives. Something happened on the 3rd day. Something that turned frightened, hiding men into people who walked into the teeth of the Roman Empire and said, "We saw him. We touched him. He is risen. And we will not stop saying so, whatever the cost." The cost, for most of them, was everything. And they paid it. If you made it to the very end of this video, thank you. Genuinely. You just walked through one of the most historically rich and personally significant investigations in all of early Christian history. 3 things before you go. Hit the like button right now. 1 second. It means everything for helping this channel reach more people who love this kind of deep, honest exploration. Subscribe and hit the bell. Every week we go this deep. The Apostles today, something equally significant next week. You do not want to miss it. And leave me a comment. Tell me, which Apostle story surprised you most tonight? Which one had more evidence than you expected? And is there an apostle we should do a dedicated full video on? I read every comment. I respond. Let's keep going deeper together. I'll see you in the next video. God bless you.